I would like to thank everyone that has joined the hackathon today. As this is a continuation from the hackathon of 2 weeks ago, where we more or less gave an introduction into electronic laboratory notebooks and let's say the basics behind it and how you can use it in theory with a quick demonstration of the usage of the one that has been implemented by NanoCommons, and especially by our partner 7+9, which is represented now here by Thomas Exner, along with his team, Jochen Maya, which are the technicians behind all this great work. So firstly, so more or less the idea of this hackathon is to follow along more or less hands-on practice on how to use Synode, the ELN that we will be using, and so that people can understand and learn how to work through Synode and its functions, and how they can implement it into their everyday experimental and analytical practice in a way. Before we go into a short, let's say, overview, some slides from the presentation we gave 2 weeks ago. If you would like to hear the whole presentation and see also the demonstration of Synode, please feel free to visit the NanoCommons YouTube page where the videos have been uploaded. I'd like to ask if you can see my screen and the slide.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect, thank you very much. Give me a second so I can open up the chat so you can see. So I would like to ask everyone before I start, and so as not to forget, that please don't forget to register. So I have pasted into the chat 2 links. The first one is for registering into the 7+9 NanoCommons instance of Synode. More or less, you should see a page like that, which you can where you can register. And of course, there's another link for a Google Drive folder, which will more or less give you some files that we're gonna use as we walk along through the workflow. And also, if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to interrupt me, or if you don't want your voice to be heard, please type into the chat. I have the chat open. I will be happy to answer any questions. When we go into the hands-on session, then we will be doing things a bit slower so that everyone can follow along and everyone is able to more or less state their any issues they might have, etc. So a quick overview of the electronic laboratory notebooks and why we need them in everyday experimental practice. These are some slides, as I said, from our previous presentation. More or less, the idea is that in everyday scientific practice today, and with the technological advancement and the complex requirements when it comes to experimental practice, more or less you want different people working in different aspects of the same experiment, the same project, etc. In which case, sharing data and protocols and results between the different members of a single group or a consortium or even different, let's say, industrial partners becomes very significant. There have been various ways to do so, more or less like the Lean software, etc., which are very rigid though, and more or less they are used for mainly regulatory purposes, and so that it's a follow the sample approach, which is not, let's say, ideal when it comes to more, let's say, innovative and scientific, let's say, experimental process. And of course, more or less to share data protocols, etc., you can do a lot of things like send an email with a Word file, an Excel with data, but you need to have your USB with you and take it from the computer where you created the data, etc. So more or less, it would be best to have local or cloud-based solutions. which are networked and which can capture the data and the protocols and everything directly and can be accessible from different people that are given access to it, etc. There you need to put notes, let's say comments regarding some analysis, whether you deviated from a protocol, etc. To put your data inside. If you have any, let's say, images that you would like to import, like TM images, or let's say the grading, if you do some mass spectrometry, etc. You have all of your protocols, etc. And of course, you are able to readily search using a search function everything that you have done in there, so that you don't need, let's say, after a year or two of doing a project, to go through different paper notebooks or different disparate Excel files or whatever. But you have everything gathered in one place, organized and structured, so you can use a simple search function like you do in every website or in Google or a search engine, etc., that you can find something that you want to. Also, such software provide a lot a starting point for report creation or publication creation, because they can more or less be used to create reports, etc. And in this way, it's more or less a good starting point to do so instead of having to start from a blank paper. And the future, more or less, it's that you can interconnect these tools like the ELNs with other, let's say, databases or repositories, etc., as we're gonna see, so as to either send or pull data, etc. So more or less, what the ELNs provide us is more or less the introduction of streamlined project management into everyday scientific practice. So more or less, we approach everything like a project that needs to be managed accordingly. They can be locally or cloud-based. They're easy to set up, and you can set up inside complex experiments where you need to capture a lot of things in different matrices, etc. You can have your protocols inside, notes, record the settings from different instruments without the danger to forget something. If you deviated from a required protocol, etc. You digitize your data directly, and then you can more or less easier quality control your results, your data, your processes, and of course, it's the best way to have when you have a very complex experiment. Let's say if you do a mesocosm experiment that requires more or less all the different scientific practices around, to more or less have everyone there in the process and recording everything without the need of very long and complex mail exchange or chat exchange. The barriers, though, to actually integrating ELNs in everyday experimental practice is the established habits of everyone. Like you see, it's a new tool. You feel more comfortable with using, let's say, a paper notebook, your USB stick, etc. The lack of time for integration, because we have to be honest and say that when you start integrating something like this into everyday scientific practice, by default, you will need some substantial amount of time to transfer everything from offline to online, more or less. Another problem is that in general, people are not so much trained in proper data management practices, and that this needs to be changed in general over time. Of course, there's also the mistrust of cloud-based solutions and digital tools. What will happen if I run out of space, if there's a data breach, if the server goes down, etc. And of course, in all, when you establish something like this, you need to train the people that are going to use it, so that everyone knows how to use it properly. In general, though, if you look at the statistics by establishing this practice like that, you will more or less save 1 working day per week in the mid to long term when it comes to using ELNs versus paper notebooks or other, let's say, established traditional means of data capturing and storage, etc. So more or less a quick overview of the environment and what we're going to do. Here, more or less, you see what is called an inventory. In a way, it's more or less a data template that we're going to implement inside inside the electronic lab notebook. We will play with it, modify it a bit, upload a ready-made template, which more or less will demonstrate you how you can transfer data existing, let's say, in your computer into Synode in a way. And also, let's say, best practices of maximizing metadata capturing, so as to have full transparency of your data and capture the metadata as best as possible so that you can more or less have reproducible results. Protocols, so we'll see how we will create a protocol repository, how we can do that. Besides, let's say, manual typing in the protocol, so we can pull from online resources, we can upload, let's say, protocols from other sources, etc. Synode comes with integrated Microsoft Online functionalities, so you can do a lot of things. Then, what we will do is play with the results section, see how you can more or less upload results, type in results, some basic, let's say, functions that you more or less can use through Microsoft Excel, etc. And finally, more or less the creation of a data template that then can be extracted and sent into a repository. Right now, extraction can more or less happen by extracting this template into an Excel or a CSV format, which then you can directly mail to the data manager or to yourself, etc., and then play with it accordingly. So with this, I would like to stop the presentation. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask. Else, I would like to move to Synode. And more or less, you should have seen this screen already, which is the login screen. You can sign up here, create a free account. I would like to say that this instance of Synode is set up by Thomas and his team and 7+9 friends is fully functional. There are no restrictions, not entirely true. There are some probably resource restrictions when on the server. So if there are, let's say, 20,000 people using the Synode instance at once, I think that's going to be a bit problematic. But in terms of functionality, there are absolutely no restrictions. So if you log in, more or less, you will have an overview page of the Synode environment. Usually, if you have used or if you use Synode, you will see an overview of the current tasks that are assigned to you or that are assigned to different people, etc. So you can filter accordingly. If you click the filter button, you can filter by date, by status, by project, etc., or experiment, as we're going to see in the process. You also get a calendar, which is used so that you can see upcoming deadlines, etc., and so on, and recent work that has been performed within Synode. So to start with the hands-on practice, when you actually more or less create an account, Synode would ask you to also create a team, which is your personal team. More or less, this is your personal space where you can think as your personal space where you can create different projects, different tasks, different experiments, but you can also share this space with other people. So if you want, let's say, to work collaboratively with other people, whether these are your own group or this is your consortium or other, let's say, partners that you work with, then you create a team, and then inside this team, you can do different things. In the current instance of Synode, you can more or less do a lot of things. You can create as many teams as you like. So more or less, you can do that by clicking the drop-down button on the top left and clicking on New Team. which will allow you to create a new team. So I will create a new team called NanoCommons Hackathon, and then you can add a description here so that you can more or less, if you like, remember why you created this team for. As soon as you create this team, you will get this more or less view where you can see your team, and here we can play a bit. So to get to this page, if you are in the overview page and you have not seen this, you can click on settings and then on teams, and then you can see all the teams that you belong to. And then by clicking on the team, you get an overview of the team. You see here that I am named as administrator, I'm active. There are several actions here, and then I can add team members. So more or less, you can invite as many people as you like into the team. And to do so, you click to add team members. And then what happens here, you more or less invite people. I will use Tom again as always. You will have to type in their email, invite users, and then when it will ask you to invite them as a specific role. So administrators, you have the same rights as you, except of the VP, I guess. So more or less, they can add experiments, remove experiments, projects, etc., and so on. Normal users are more or less used for people that add and remove and play data. They can create a bit of workflows, etc. And guests are only people that can actually view that can view, let's say, the data inside. So more or less, if you want people to join your team, like the PIs, which, as we all know, it's better not to have them near the data. More or less, you can add them and then give them the appropriate role. And of course, you can remove, change the role, etc., by clicking here. So in this way, we add people into the project, we add, etc., teams, and then we can actually start playing with our team and project. So the first thing that would be good to do is more or less see the inventory page. More or less, the inventories can be considered as a way of creating data templates that you can play with. So we can click new inventory, and then let's say create a new inventory again. You can follow along, and here you see that you have let's say some more or less you have some columns here, and so think of that as working as more or less a way of as an Excel file. Think of it as an Excel file with different columns that you can play and modify. So what I would like you to do more or less is creating a new inventory, and more or less what we want to do is modify that so we can actually upload, let's say, file number 1 from our folder, which is called inventory sample.xls. More or less, by clicking on the columns button here, you can add the column. So what we would like to do is that we close that. We keep the name, so the assigned, added, and added by, we keep this here, and the ID, because these are automatically filled in by sign-out. And what the columns that I would like you to add, if you open the Excel file as well, is provider ID, save column. As you can see, when you add column, you can also add the type of columns. What type is the column, whether it's a number, a file, a drop-down, checklist status. You can do a lot of different things. So provider ID, cast number, EC number, and one more, I will add molecular weight. as a number, and one more, which will be more or less other information. And I will add this as a file type. So now that we have these columns more or less, we can start adding stuff. So more or less you can add a new item, in which case the different fields will open and you are able to type in, upload files, etc., as you will see. More or less, each time it tells you enter name, what's your sample name, more or less, enter text here, enter a number here, and then select a file of maximum 5 megabytes to upload. As I told you already, these 4 columns, the assigned, ID, added on, added by, you cannot modify this. These are system related for transparency reasons and for database issues. So you can type in, but the other cool thing that you can do more or less is that by taking the import inventory, edit inventory, you can say import items. So then it will tell you to upload the file. It says to limit the amount to 500 just for speed purposes. So if we choose to upload our more or less our first file and click upload, then you will see that it starts reading the file, as you can see here, and then you can do different things. So the cool thing is that more or less what you need to do is match the columns that are read from the Excel file into the template that you have created manually inside the sign node. So the name here we will match with name, the provider ID we will match with the provider ID, more or less that's the code that the provider sent you. The cache number with the cache number, the EC number with the EC number. If you don't want something, so let's say I decided not to add the PubChem substance ID, etc., we don't add it, and also the molecular weight. And then we click import. And as you can see, everything is uploaded and saved automatically. And here in the other information, what we're going to do more or less is that in many cases, you want to upload something, let's say to have your MSDS file, etc. So what we want to do here is more or less we want to upload the file that we want to more or less upload the file that we of the MSDS. So this is the file called. Well, give me a second, please. The file number 2, which is called the silver dispersion, etc. So give me a second because I did not download it. So what we want to do here is more or less click on the edit button, and then we go to other information. We click here, and more or less what we do is we double click on the file and save, and that will upload the file, and then you have, let's say, your SDS file directly into your template. So more or less, this is the process of creating, let's say, a starting inventory for your samples, etc. And then you can add more columns with respect to how things work, and let's say to add your actual data based on what you do. So let's say you want to do, let's say, physical chemical characterization, or you would like to add, let's say, exposure data or whatever. So you add the columns and then you go on accordingly. So I'd like to ask if everything is okay, if you follow along properly, normally, and if you had any issues playing with it, etc. So please let me know if you've reached this point, and if you would like me to go over something again, or if everything is fine. No one is speaking. So have you reached this point, someone? Okay, I'll assume you have. So after doing that, more or less, we're going to start playing with creating project experiments, etc. So what we're going to do here then is more or less we go into the project section. And here you have a blank page. Wrong thing again. So we are so more or less we go to projects, and here you see we have templates. We will check with that in a minute. And what we want to do more or less is create a new project. So there are two ways to do that. The first way is that you can arrange things differently. So you can have a number of projects that are displayed here. So more or less what you would do in this case, if you want to follow along, is create a new project, and that you can call, say, test project 1, and then you create a project. And this is added here. The other way that you can do it more or less is to create folders. So think of it as, let's say, you want to create a folder for a specific project for which you have, let's say, different work packages. And within these work packages, you have different projects. So more or less, what you can do is click create folder, and then you can type in, let's say, test 2, and then you create a folder. So more or less, you would have created a folder here, in which case you can go inside and then also start building projects or creating subfolders in here. So you can say, more or less, you can create, let's say, a folder that you can name work package 1. You create the folder, and then you go in and you add a new project. When you create a project, you have two options. You can more or less make it visible either to project members only or to all team members. If you pick project members only the people that you will invite to this project will be able to see the project. If you pick all team members, let's say if you want a project or a workflow that will be seen by the entire, let's say, your entire group, you can have it to all team members. And then you create, and then what you want to do is start adding people. So you can click on the plus sign here, and what you do more or less, you pick people that are already in your team. Again, you select a role for them. Owner has full rights. A user slightly less rights, can modify things, but cannot, let's say, delete people or invite or etc. A technician more or less has to do with the experimental process, adding data or, let's say, playing with protocols, and the viewer again, more or less someone that only is able to view the results. And here you see that now I added Thomas. So more or less we have 2 people here. And if we go outside, you see you have your test project here, and then you have everything here. The good thing is that, let's say, if you create something, you want to move it, you can easily move it. So more or less, let's say we want to move this inside the folder. What we want to do is we click on it, and then more or less you can edit it accordingly. We can export it, which will export it in a zip file format if you want to transfer this somewhere else, or move it, in which case, let's say, you it gives you the different projects, and it gives you, let's say, the structure, and you can pick where to move it. It went away, and now we will see it here, more or less. And now in this way, you can create different structures for different projects, for different, let's say, groups of people that they can play, that you can assign to, and these people can more or less do stuff. Everything fine so far? Anything that we would like to do to answer? Okay, if someone is, can you copy? Yes, of course you can copy them. That's the next thing I was going to say. So again, if you click more or less, actually, if you click here, okay, I'll come into this in a second. I think with projects, probably you cannot copy them, but we'll see now that you can actually copy the tasks and the workflows that you create within projects. So the idea more or less is that you create different projects and then you use the workflow that you have already established to move between, let's say, projects, although this will have some caveats. So more or less, it's a good idea, as we will see, to have, let's say, a master environment where you can more or less have your workflows and then move these workflows around without really having, let's say, a lot of people in this folder. I would like to say also that, let's say, for each project, you can also archive the project, which more or less is a way of putting this into archive, but it does not delete the project because the ELNs work on the idea of more or less having full transparency of data and the work done within a project. So it's they don't allow you to delete things more or less. So everything that's been done, even test stuff, etc., these are archived into the archive part of your workspace, but they are not deleted permanently. So you can do that by picking the one that you want and then clicking archive. So more or less, I don't know, everyone almost done or almost done? Do we have a project at least that we can play with? Okay, I think that's a yes. So before creating before creating a workflow, what we want to do is to have some protocols that we can actually use to perform experiments. If you go into the protocol section, more or less here, you have a protocols repository. Again, it reminds a bit of the inventory. So you have a name for your protocol. You have a set of keywords that you can add, a number of linked tasks, published by, published at, and last modified. The good thing with protocols is that the person that adds a protocol is the owner of the protocol, which means that someone else cannot modify this protocol when it is inside the repository. We will see that you can modify the protocols within an experimental, let's say, workflow, but you cannot modify the protocols in the repository. And this is to, as a safety precaution, so as people, let's say, someone that makes a deviation in the protocol will not, let's say, create issues in the entire group by modifying the protocol based on the deviation and keeping the master protocol, especially if it's a standardized process, so as to use it. As we said, Sign-out comes with Microsoft Office integrated. So more or less what you can do is create a new protocol, and you can create a protocol which then you can use more or less to do stuff. So you can add a description. So when you create a protocol, it has the created date, the last modified date. You can add keywords. The author, which is the owner, it's the only person who is able to modify the protocol within the repository. If there are any other authors, think of it more or less again as a publication that have contributed to the protocol. And then you have a full, more or less, working office where you can start typing in the protocols. Of course, there are other ways to do it, which are a lot easier. So if we go back to the protocols repository, we have the import more or less function, which if we click, you can import protocols from different files. So right now, you can import protocols either from a .eln file, which is a sign-out type of file, and from protocols.io file. Protocols.io is a repository, something more like Zenodo, where you can upload your protocols. These protocols can get a DOI, and then these are findable again if you want to from the entire scientific community and can be used accordingly. They can be cited by others if they have used, etc. But you don't really, so if you download the protocol from a .io file and you want to import it, you can do it like that, or you can take it directly online from protocols.io, as we will see. So more or less what we want to do here is use a .eln file, which is also a way so that you can move protocols around. And when you export a protocol, as I'm going to show you more or less, you can export multiple protocols at once and then import them into another repository, in another sign-out account, more or less as moving around different protocols. If you, let's say, have a cloud-based instance of sign-out, you put it locally into your institution, more or less, you can transfer directly things like that. So again, we do that, and more or less, we pick the BET file here, which is yes, is the Browner MTL protocol, more or less a BET protocol. It's rigid and so on. You can check it. It has when it was created, when it was last modified, and more or less you load it, and then it's successfully imported. You close it, and here you have your protocol. So if we open it now, you see that the protocol is here and can be used in your workflows. The protocols have different steps, which we will see, and then you can more or less use them, and we will see the functionalities within our workflow. The other way to go to do so is, let's say, also is if you go to external protocols, then you will see here protocols.io. More or less what it does here, it connects with an API to protocols.io, and in this way, you can actually search for protocols that you may be interested in, and then you can more or less download and import the protocols. So let's say if we search for a UVVis protocol, let me type that. We see that we have more or less two sheets. One is that 7 steps, and one is that more or less it's the nanomaterials UVV measurements. It's a protocol that has been worked for from the University of Birmingham. So we pick that one. It has a preview of the protocol, as you can see, etc. A lot of information, the different steps. We can import that as well. And if we click import, you see that we have two options. You can import it to the team protocols or into my protocols. We want to collaborate, so we will add it to the team protocols. So we are that, and now if we go back to team protocols, now you see that the protocol has been added, and the different steps are again here, etc., with the settings for the instruments and so on. And here, when you download it, you can edit it because you imported it, and then more or less modify that so as to match your need if required. And more or less, we start building our repository. If you have standardized protocols, it would be a good idea to put them in protocols.io, or you can more or less import them here by either typing it, or I forgot to say, you can also, if you edit the protocol, you more or less can also insert files, etc. Here you can link files, so more or less you can upload the Word file through the Word function and have, let's say, a Word file with your entire protocol. Can we make folder protocols? I don't think so. So more or less the file for protocols are in the top bar here. So more or less, because the idea is that you want to have, let's say, a repository of protocols that people can work with. I understand the usefulness of having different folders, let's say, to do so per, let's say, per application. But it doesn't really exist in this case. The main, let's say, distinction here would be to add things as your protocols and in the team's protocols. But yes, exactly. But more or less, you can also filter and use, because you can use keywords, but can also filter. So if, let's say, I click UVVs, you see that it automatically filters. So if you have, let's say, if you want to perform an experiment for something very specific, then that means that by just starting typing in, you will get all the matching more or less protocols for what you type in, and it will be a lot easier to filter the protocols that you would like to see. Sorry. So now we have, let's say, a few protocols that we can play with, and then if we go back to our projects and to our work Papadiamantis project, let's say what you want to do is more or less create a new experiment. The way to do so is that you go into the project, and now you have you have a button here that you can click, which is called new experiment. So if you click that, again, you give it a name, take experiment characterization 1. I want to say also, I think that be careful with the naming that you use, especially if you're doing it in a team that is your main one, because main names can be unique. So you may have issues when typing the exact same name again. Again, you can add a description and you create a experiment. So now you have an experiment inside which we can more or less build your experimental workflow with different tasks, as we're going to see, and so on. A few things that you can play with if you want to do. If you click, you can see here. You can edit the details, of course. You can duplicate, which more or less copying the experiment. So if I click to duplicate, you can duplicate it and also pick where inside another project you want to duplicate. So more or less, I can choose to copy it into test project number 2, let's say. So if you go here, you can see that you have here the experimental characterization, but also if you go here, you have it here as well. And this is how, let's say, if you want to move different, let's say, experiments from one project to another, or let's say from one project to another, you create your experiment and then you copy it to the new project, more or less. And the other thing that you can do again, move it, which more or less will also is more or less the same thing. You can move it to another place and so on. This is more or less of a cut and paste. So if you create it by mistake here, then you can move it to some other place. And so more or less here is the same thing as actually creating a template of an experiment that then you can have and move around to different places by copying them, etc. All good so far? Okay. So the next step in the process, more or less, so we create our experiment, and now we would like to create a new task. So if you go into the experiment, you get a screen that you can use. More or less what we want to do here. We have different actions that we will see, and more or less we have the edit experiment. So if you always need to edit an experiment if you want to change something or something, and then it's a very easy drag and drop process. More or less, you drag it in, you create a new task. You can say sample preparation. You add it, and then let's say you add a new one. You this characterization. And PET characterization. Here. So create now, let's say, workflows, and we create different tasks that we will need to play with. And what happens here is more or less that you can create interconnections. So let's say if you want, let's say, to assign different tasks to different team members, but let's say there are dependencies and codependencies between the different tasks, you can do so by more or less, if you click on the one task and you drag and drop, more or less, you see that you create an arrow, which then you drop on the task, and that will create a dependency. So more or less, this is the first step, and then you need to prepare your sample, and then you need to use it to perform the characterization. Similarly here, you can delete these arrows if you want to by just clicking on the X button here, and you can create different codependencies, let's say, the way you like. But let's say I have these dependencies, trying to create a dependency, then back from the BD to some characterization, it will not let you do it, because more or less this is the starting point, and then you need more or less to follow this workflow so as to create it. So you cannot more or less do that and then go back to the beginning. So you need to create your workflow as we go along from the beginning to the end. You do that more or less, and you click save, and what you get is your workflow. And here again, you can do different stuff. You can play with more or less. You can add tags like keywords from existing, or adding new keywords. And in this way, you can more or less, you can let's say use this so as also to help with searching, because anything you do here, more or less within SignNode, you can use a search function so as to more or less search and find protocols, results, people, etc., and go on. So now that we have created our workflow, we can do different things, as I said. One thing is to say, if you want to move your workflow from, let's say, from where you are here to somewhere else, you can do two stuff. One is to copy as a template, and then again move it to different places. So you see, I can move it more or less to copy it as a template into a different project. So let's say if you have a new project that you would like to use the same workflow by someone else or by the same people, you can more or less copy it. The other thing is that you can move it again to other cut paste to another project, which is the moving. But I would like you to also see what it says here, that moving is possible only to projects that contain same or additional users. And this means that you cannot cut paste a workflow from one project to the other that does not contain the same people. And this is very significant for transparency purposes, because theoretically, when you assign a work to someone, or when you create a workflow that actually you have different people who are working on it, then this actually inhibits you from moving a workflow to another project where these people will not be able to see the work that has been done already and let's say more or less hide the results from them. Because you can actually move these results to, let's say, if you have performed an experiment, you can move these results to another project, but you have not invited the same people there and hide it from them, so they are not able to access the data. So for transparency purposes, it is not possible to remove a workflow from a project to another project that the people that should be there are not there. And more or less, and I think that if I try to move it here, it will not let me move it. It can, yeah, okay. So more or less, it let me move it because I have Thomas as an administrator. So if I had a project that Thomas was not part of, then more or less it would not allow me to. Or do I have it? The clone? I moved the clone. Okay. So yeah. So now, but if we go in now again into our workflow, and we want to assign tasks to people. More or less, in each case, the person that more or less created the steps will be assigned to it, so they can get the notification and keep track of what's going on. Then, by clicking Manage Users, more or less, you can add people that can do stuff, and then more or less you assign it to them as well, and they will also start getting notifications and keep track of what's going on. Same, let's say, with other workflows, etc. So you can assign the people you want to the task you want. You don't have to assign everything to everyone, and of course you can create different deadlines. So you can add from the calendar a due date on each of the tasks, and then by doing so, then the people will have a deadline and will also get notifications of the things that need to be done at the time that they need to be done. And more or less, any other questions? Is it clear so far? Anything unclear? Are you able to create the workflow? Okay. No, it's not for project management only. We will see now. Yes, now we're moving towards more or less adding data and more or less setting up workflows for adding data. And so how we do that, more or less. So what we want, let's say if we go into the UVVs, then you have on the top right corner different options. So you have the protocol tab, the results tab, the activity tab, and the archived results. As I said in the past, you cannot delete anything, more or less. So if you do something, if you input something into an electronic lab notebook, you cannot delete it. And this is again for data transparency purposes. So if you add the results here and you archive them, it will go into the archived results, but they will not be deleted permanently. So let's say that we want to perform a UVV's characterization. So more or less, again, we have a due date. We can actually here say when we start. So the due date theoretically is the 7th of February. We can say that we started a bit early. So started on the Sunday. You can add tags here. So let's say silver nanomaterials, etc. UV and so on, and you add tags. You can also add notes again with that you want to do more or less. And the next thing is what more or less what you want to do. Yes, so more or less, if I go back, I'm sorry. So we have this workflow, and then we go into the task itself, to the specific task only, not the entire workflow, and we start in adding protocols and data. So the first thing we want to do is to add the protocol so that the person that will perform the experiment, even if it's us or if it's someone else, will know what is the protocol or the method, the SOP that they need to follow so as to perform the specific task within a project, not for the entire project. So this is very dedicated to the specific task. Thank you for that. And what we do here more or less, of course, you can, if you want, you can start typing your protocol. Not ideal, but if you go into the protocol options, you have different things. So you can import a protocol, you can export a protocol, and you can load from the repository. So if we click load from the repository, it will provide us all the protocols that are within the repository. We can filter again with specific keywords so that, as it was asked previously, we can find, let's say, we have a very big repository of what we want. And so we pick the protocol we want to add and we load it into our specific task. It will give you a warning message if you have, let's say, for example, and if you have put something in there, it will override what you will have in there. So this is why it's good to do this at the start of setting up a workflow. You say okay, and then more or less, as you can see, it inputs the protocol here. And the next thing we do is we want to say to people, let's say that for this specific task, we want this specific nanomaterial or this specific material or substance to be analyzed. So if we go here to assign from, yes, I do that to another one. So give me 1 second, please. I apologize for that. So I'm doing it very fast now. Sorry, I did it in the wrong team. The inventory. So before I continue, I want to as I said, the question, if it needs to be a precise format, it usually directly can be as a .dll file, which is a signed format, or from protocols.io. But you can also upload files as you will be able to see through the Word function. In this case, you will not have, let's say, this format of step-by-step, but you will more or less have a Word file of the protocol. So it would be best, in my opinion, to spend some time, substantial amount of time, so as to import your protocol into a step-by-step function, because you will see there are some benefits on that. And to go back to the previous question, that we have the protocol here, but if you go to the BET, you see characterization that there is no protocol here, more or less. So when we add the protocol into a workflow in the specific task, then we add it only for the specific tasks. And you cannot add a protocol, let's say, that will cover the whole, more or less, experimental workflow. And what I want to show now is that more or less you can assign in a way, you can assign the samples that you want this let's say task to be used with. So more or less you pick the inventory, more or less the data template you created, and then you pick the sample that you would like to add to the specific task in the workflow, and you press assign, and then it gives you two options: to assign to task and downstream, and to assign to task. So if you click assign to task and downstream, it will, from the point that you actually assign the sample, then this will be assigned to the entire workflow from there down. So if I click assign to downstream, you can see that now it has assigned the silver dispersion sample into my workflow. And we will see that if we go now to, if we now go to BT characterization, again, in the assigned items, you have the silver dispersion assigned, more or less. And here, of course, we cannot import load from repository. You can add the BT, again, okay. And now you have again the assigned nanomaterial, and now we have, for this specific task, we have a new protocol that you can assign to. And now, when you load the protocol inside a specific workflow, what happens now is that you can actually play with the protocol, more or less. So if, let's say you click on a task, more or less, and then you can modify it, etc. And let's say if you deviate let's say you can type in something that you're deviating from the protocol. You can change something in the protocol, and you click save. And then, when you do so, what happens is that more or less it gives you here an information symbol. This is very important because it says that the protocol was created then, that template was updating then, and again updated on here. And now it will tell you that this version of the protocol in the task is modified. You wish to save it as a new protocol template. So more or less, if you make a modification in the protocol for a specific reason and for a specific project, and you would like to keep that as a template, then you can save it as a template. And here, but as you can see, it tells you that you can save it as a new template, but you cannot override the protocol that more or less existed in the repository. And it has different, let's say, more or less options. The one is to unlink the template. So more or less, you will unlink it from the original template, so that, let's say, you will not see the other that they are linked, so that the one does not originate from the other. So if we go into the repository, it will say that there's a modification into one protocol, let's say, inside one of the workflows. And if you want to update it from there, or you can save it directly as a new protocol, or to revert it back to its original form. In which case, if you revert, then it's going to be the same exactly, and this one does not matter anymore, more or less, it's not highlighted. So, so we have our protocol, and here, more or less, again, you can do different stuff. So if you say that it's in progress, the protocol, then you can start doing the different, let's say, steps. So here you have a description, and if you go to the different steps, you see step 1, some preparation, and here you can also start uploading stuff. You can add a chemical drawing, etc. You can add attachments, or you can add new comments. For example, let's say that it says to Vertex, the golden part is for 2 minutes, etc. So more or less, let's say, and create a new suspension, a stock suspension of 0.5 ml. So more or less, to let's say get to a final volume of 25 ppm more or less. And here, more or less, you can say, let's say I deviated more or less. So so final volume was, let's say, 24.7 mg per liter. And you can comment here. So in this way, you can remember what you did. If there is, let's say, a workflow, an SOP for instruments, you can start noting, let's say, the different settings that you use. Let's say if it's a mass spec, which line you use, etc., and so on. And then so that you don't modify the protocol, but you more or less note down the different deviations. So let's say if you want to write a report, you don't more or less have a modified protocol. You have your original protocol, and you have notes underneath that you can use then to more or less report accordingly, whether that's a publication, whether that's a reporting to, let's say, the commission, I don't know, organization, etc. And then, and of course, when you perform a step, you can more or less click here, and then more or less you said you have completed the step, and in this way you can more or less go in a step-by-step approach, and you don't forget where you are, where you stopped, etc., so that you can continue your stepwise approach and so on, and everything that actually takes place within the task, it will more or less be in the activity section. It will have a notification. So everything that takes place within an experiment, a project, and a task is then added within the activity of the specific task. So everyone knows that are part of the project, the experiment, or the task. So they know how the work is progressing, what has been changed, what has not been changed, etc. Now we have loaded our protocol. And we're gonna add a bit of data. So any other questions, etc.? Continuing. So here is where we're gonna more or less capture our results. As we said, SignNote is integrated with Microsoft Word Online. So more or less there are different functions that you can do using the SignNote, let's say, the Microsoft Word functionalities. So our results more or less can be a table, or text. So more or less I can add a table. Give it these results. In which case, again, I can add, let's say, in the table, I need to, so you add the table, and then you need to click the edit result button. Again, I remind you that by clicking that, you archive the result, but you do not delete the result. Yes, there is a version control available for the protocols. So if you change more or less protocols, if you modify something in the protocol, this will go into the activity section and will more or less give you, tell you that this protocol was modified and done. And if you remember, if I go back to the protocol, here in the details, it tells you like who created, who modified it, and then if you make a change, let's say into the protocol, more or less, modify it again, and you save. Here that's highlighted, it tells you when it was last updated. As I said, when you change something within a workflow, it will not update the repository. So if you go back into the protocols repository and you go into the UVV's protocol, you will it's the same. Nothing has changed here because, as I said, only the main author is able to edit that. That's the thing, that if protocols change over time, more or less what happens is that let's say if you modify it within a workflow, within a task, then you can directly save it as a new protocol. Because let's say if I add the protocol and Thomas makes it, does the experiment and change something in the protocol and update it, then he will not be able to overwrite my protocol, more or less. He will, the other way around is possible. So if I modify this, this is master SOP modification, and I press save. And if I go then again to my project, so now you see that there's a yellow sign, and here it will tell you there's a new version of the protocol available in the protocol repository. Would you like to update it? And here it says update from the repository. So you can update if something changes in the repository within a workflow, but you can do it the other way around. Assuming that someone changed the protocol and wants to create a new protocol, that person, if it's not the main, let's say, author of the initial protocol, will not be able to change the protocol. So if you change protocols over time, either you change the protocols, let's say the main author wants to the main author can change the original protocol so as to have a new version in which name he has to rename in version 2, or you save the updated protocol as a new protocol within the repository and say that this is a new version. Yes, I guess the answer to the question is what you want to do. If you want to give both protocols, then you duplicate, make the changes in the repository, and here version 1, version 2. If you don't really mind keeping the old protocol, you make the changes within the original protocol, and then maybe you change the name to UVV's measurement version 2, more or less. But I think it's a matter of preference of how you want to do it. But if you make deviations and changes within a workflow, then you will not be able to change the master protocol from the repository. And I hope that answers the question, because I know it's not a definitive answer, to be honest. Yes, the main thing is that, let's say someone started an experiment, changes something in the protocols, it doesn't mess the repository. So it will not let you update the repository when you are inside the workflow. You can do the other way around, but you can do you cannot go, let's say, and mess the repository by changing something within the workflow. So going back to the results, again, we click add the edit button. We can change the name. We can more or less, again, if we want to more or less, we want to record what we saw. So the max absorption, and we say 512, 511. This should not happen with the UV, but it's just for demonstration purposes. We can type in our data, and more or less, we can also do, let's say, simple functions, use some simple Excel functions so as to perform, let's say, the average, mistake, and so on, or let's say or let's say some very simplistic like standard deviations, etc. Sorry about that. Yes. Wrong cells. And you have a standard deviation. And you have, let's say, your average and your standard deviation, more or less. And you save. Again, you save your table. Again, you can add comments regarding things that you notice, etc., and so on. But there are other things that you can do. More or less, you can do chemical drawings if you want. I'm really not good with these things, so I will not try to do it. But you can also, let's say, upload files. And this is very cool because, let's say, if we upload file number 5, which is the ACE Nano UVV results, more or less. So what we have done here, and we click add. So you get a file here, which uploads, and we work on that. And let's say in this way, it's a very good approach. So as let's say, if you want to add your raw data, you can upload your raw data directly from the internet. Well, you export it and you upload it into Sino. Or if you want to create, let's say, files that can do some of the some functionalities, etc., then you upload. Does it work? No. It's a bit slow. I'm sorry about that. Perfect. And what we did here in ACE Nano, more or less, is with one of our postdoc at the time, Emily. What she did was create a file which you can more or less use. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm sorry that this doesn't work, but theoretically, you upload the file and you are able to more or less work on the file directly through Excel Online here, so as more or less to input the results, and then it will give you a graph and make calculations and so on. I don't know why this doesn't work at the moment. We'll look into it and come back. And of course, other ways you can do it. You can again upload stuff. So theoretically, oh, that's that's another part, and so on. And in this way, you start creating more or less and capturing the results. Again, let's say eventually you can more or less put in observations part, more or less, type in what you observed from the experiment with any observation. This is good, let's say, especially if you want, if you see something or something did not go well, or something was did not make sense, etc. from the instruments, then you more or less capture everything here, and you capture all the results, etc. And as I said, everything you do more or less is tracked here in the activity, so you can see what happened and when. So you can actually track the entire task and so on, and see how things moved along. Any questions? Just to show you, as I said, if you're in the results section and you archive your results, it goes away from your main, let's say, window, but it will be here. And here, from here, more or less, you can download, etc. Oh, you can delete that? No, you can delete that. Apparently you can. Okay, that's a new function. Apparently you can permanently delete something. I'm sorry about that. I thought that you could not really delete stuff. But in general, first you archive and then you can delete stuff, etc. I think that's the difference from the local versus the cloud-based version. So more or less, and then if you want to do, you can do the same thing. Let's say if you go back to your tasks, you can go here, import again the BET file, play with the results. You can also more or less upload the file. So there's also a file theoretically, which is the BET to upload, which is, let's say, record BET results. What? And you add it. It's being uploaded. It will take some time, but theoretically, what this is this file here, where you have the result that you get from a BET instrument, the pressures, the isotherms, the C constants, etc. And then you have all the averages and standard deviations that you can import into Simon and work on them. Do not wait for that, etc. So this is so far. And then, of course, as I said, you do that. You can copy this as template. So if I copy it as template, I can move it to test project 1. And then if I go to projects and go to test project 1, you see here, and then you have it here. The workflow has been moved to the new, let's say, project. You see again that all the notifications for the protocols and notifications are here, and the exception is here now that because we want to use the protocol for a new project, it assumes that we will probably want to more or less assign new items. So the item assignment, the sample assignment, does not transfer within with the protocol. And this is why it's a good idea. Let's say if you are doing a lot of similar experiments, you have a templates folder that you have here with all your, let's say, things around the different workflows, no matter how complex they are, without any issues. And you don't have to usually you don't have to continuously build new complex workflows from scratch. You more or less you want to have the template of the project and experiment, which then you can modify within a project slightly. But let's say if you want to have, let's say, a toxicity experiment with different positive and negative baselines and etc., that you have something very complex created that you can then move around, etc. So And yes, thanks, Thomas. So probably, yes, you're right, that the permanently delete function is something that can be deactivated to the system. And it's a good thing, yes, to have it in a training instance, but again, for data transparency reasons, it would be best if you use it, let's say, in a working environment. Maybe you want a training instance where you can delete stuff so people can play with, but for the actual, for the actual work, you don't, you deactivate it so that, as Thomas says, you will not be able to do any data manipulation, etc., and so on. Not that this happens anyway. So yeah, so any questions so far? I hope it's straightforward, that you are able to follow along. No issues identified. Okay. So let's say we're going a bit faster than I was expecting. Have I forgotten anything? Okay. And as I said, one of the cool features of, let's say, an ELN is that it can also provide a basis of creating more or less different a basis for a report or a publication, or I don't know, an abstract for your, let's say, that you can rely on to start writing something. By no means, this is, let's say, although I don't know, it depends on how you set it up, should be considered like a full report. Although I believe that if you are very good in structuring things and writing things, you will be able to do so. In the report section, more or less, what happens is that you get this screen and you can click on new reports. And then you have the different projects, and you pick, let's say, the project for which you want to create a report from, and you click create. And then what happens here, it's give you the entire project, the different, let's say, folders within the project, and then the different experiments and the different experimental task. So here you pick what do you want to include. So let's say you want just the UVVs because you performed, let's say, a round robin UVVs, and you want to more or less create a report on the specific round robin. You click, you just pick the UVVs, and then you go and you choose content. So here you can see that you can have from results, let's say, oriented to let's say full transparency. More or less, you have the all tasks and contents, that even the activity and also, let's say, comments, etc., would be added to the report, and so on. The steps, what's completed, is not completed, the results, file stable text, the activity, as I said, etc. The more or less the inventory, which will act as your data template, all protocols and steps, content, etc. And you say you want to add everything, you add it, and then you get the full report, as you can see here. And you see that everything is saved here. This one says completed, more or less that we've completed it, and then everything is included, the activity of the task, etc. And of course, you can print it, you can save it as a PDF to the inventory, in which case, more or less, you will need to define a column in which you will add the report, and if you think about it, this is a very good way to more or less store your metadata along with your data and link them to a specific sample. So when you send, let's say, the data template to a database for uploading, then you will have a full data and metadata report linked to your specific sample, more or less. So you test the inventory, you need to add a column. So you need to add the file columns. We had added one, if you remember, in the wrong team. Sorry about that. You pick one, and then you will need to select the specific, let's say, sample that you want to add it to, and add it there. So let me do it. Wait, I will press save here. Test report. Sorry. So if I go to my inventory, so as we said, we can edit the inventory. Yes, sorry. So I add a column here. I say report, or it can be, if you don't want to add the result, if you don't add the results, just metadata report. Let's say it's a file type. You save. You close that, and now if you go to the reports, we can pick the report. Can edit it, and then we save the PDF to the inventory. So we go to the test inventory. We have the metadata report theoretically for this specific sample, and we save it. To expect it through. Good. Metadata. Okay, I don't know what's going on. We'll take it out with Thomas and fix that. You can download as a PDF or a docx report as a Word file or a PDF file, and so on. Okay. And so you can have your report here, and you can more or less download it and play with it then accordingly. What else? So any questions? And of course, I want to remind you that if you go to your overview, then you see the tasks that are assigned to you, then tasks that are assigned to everyone. You see the status here, you see more or less an overview. You can see here with the red dot that you have deadlines, etc. So you can see that here there is a deadline for the some preparation, etc. If you move on, you will see that there are more deadlines that so you can keep track. And here you can also see project, all the recent work that has been done, and you can filter by project, by inventories, protocols, reports, etc. And this is a good way, more or less, to keep track of what's going on, especially if you're a PI, or let's say you run a lot of experiments of what's going on, what's upcoming, and so on, and keep track of all the work. I think that's more or less what I wanted to say. I'm sorry if I went pretty fast. I was scared that I will not have time, but I'm 18 minutes early. So are there any questions, something you would like to discuss, something that you would like me to repeat, etc.? Please let me know. Okay. If anyone would like, yes, you can upload same way as we said. If you go into, not yet done it. So more or less, if you go into your tasks, let's say, again, image data, you can upload them into the results section as a file. And that was going to be my comment. If you have enough space, So assuming that, I remember we had discussed about having a local installation, let's say within an organization. If you have enough space, I would add the TM images inside the ELN, because if you have a local installation, then you can have unlimited space to more or less upload and save results. If you're not using, if you don't have unlimited space, let's say, for example, you choose to start trying firstly the commercial version online directly from Synode, or let's say you use you test drive the 7+9 instance and the NanoCommons instance, you will have a limited space compared, let's say, to that you would like, that you cannot really upload gigabytes of TEM images, especially in TIFF format, in high resolution TIFF format, that you would like, let's say, to keep. So based on where you have your Synode space and based on the space that you have, then you can decide what you want to do. You can have, let's say, your images locally in your institution, because most organizations now have some storage space that they can use, and then add the link to, let's say, to Synode to where the images are. Or if you have unlimited space, if you have a local installation and you have your own servers, your own storage spaces, that you can have terabytes of hard drives available, then personally, I would actually add them into, I would directly add them into Synode. Of course, be careful that the more things you upload, the slower the process will be, as you saw. Like when you were importing, more or less, let's say, the inventory, it showed that it told you that keep it up to 500 entries because of, let's say, of how fast things can be processed, more or less. So the same process applies. The links are active, I believe, yes. So I have not tried linking, let's say, in other network drives, but it should be possible because, let's say, if you want to add, let's say, a text result here, you will see that it has an insert edit link button. So you can link. So external links, let's say web links, definitely. I have not really tried to do it with, let's say, files or folders on network drives. But assuming that you are linked within the same network, I assume it would be possible because usually Office usually allows that. So probably it's something that is doable, but we need to test it, to be honest. And so yeah, we'll test it and then come back to you. But as you can see, the insert link option is readily available here, along with images. So you can choose an image to upload. I think I hit an image to play with. No, I forgot that. So you can also upload an image. You can import, let's say, chemical drawings. Again, I'm not gonna go down that road. And so on. And you can see all things that you can insert here as well. So my assumption is that you can import links and link to network drives, etc. But needs further testing just to be on the safe side. To be honest. And with this, I think I'm done with what I wanted to demonstrate. If someone can actually let me know whether how you feel, how the feeling is, if it was easy to follow, if you think that it's useful as a tool, if you think that all this made sense, it would be great to have some feedback. If you think that it could be something that you could see being integrated into your organization, etc., would be great to hear your thoughts. For me, I think that was more or less what I wanted to demonstrate.